Jesse, thank you for joining us. Now, Jesse, the report says that while the emerging economies of Southeast Asia have outperformed their counterparts in Latin America for most of the past 2 decades, their lead will slide in the next few quarters as Southeast Asian governments clamp down to fight the pandemic's lingering second and third waves. What are Latin American countries doing right now, and what best practices can Southeast Asian countries adopt?
Sure. Let me just thank you for having me on. That's just a really good question. Latin America, it's sort of been one continuous wave in the region, and the lessons that have been learned are really, hard to come by. But there are really three that could be applied, to Southeast Asia. The first is a more flexible neighborhood-based approach to lockdowns and social distancing requirements. The second, of course, getting cash into consumers' hands is, has proven critical in the region. The countries that have gone big in terms of cash handouts, namely Brazil and Chile, are the ones whose economies have recovered the fastest, and I don't think that is really any coincidence. The final point is, I think it's one that's being heard loud and clear in Southeast Asia, and vaccinations.
Mm-hmm. But how are Latin American countries balancing lives versus livelihoods?
To be honest, the emphasis, for most of the pandemic, or especially for this latest wave that we've had this past spring, has been on livelihoods and, keeping the economy open, almost, at the expense of adverse health outcomes. That is something that we've seen mainly in the two largest economies, Brazil and Mexico. But to a certain extent, some of the smaller Andean economies like Colombia and Chile, I want to emphasize that it has been more of a hybrid or integrated approach in these smaller economies, where sort of neighborhood level restrictions have enabled economies to sort of operate on a rolling basis and have been sort of more effective balancing lives and livelihoods together.
Mm-hmm. And even in Southeast Asia, the management of the pandemic varies according to countries. Sorry, could this also lead to different countries recovering much better and faster?
Yeah, I think that Southeast Asia, like Latin America, is a really complex region, and each of the countries, although it's sort of one continuous Delta wave, they're sort of at different stages. Apart from catching up on vaccinations, which, of course, is a priority in the region, the biggest differentiator for countries is going to be governance. So in terms of ensuring that households and citizens really comply with, rolling restrictions that are starting to be implemented in the region or extended down to the neighborhood level, sort of taking a page from Latin America. Really key to these is going to be, communication and clarity in terms of governance, in rolling out these restrictions, and when it comes to keeping public health systems, avoiding that they become overwhelmed, which is really when more sweeping lockdowns come into play.
And Moody's has also revised this call, and further markdowns could be in store as incoming data round out Delta's damage in Indonesia and Thailand. Tell us more about the effects of the Delta variant on these countries in terms of economic growth, recovery, and consumer confidence.
Yeah, Delta has really changed how we think about the region, how we think about Southeast Asia. These economies, looking out at the beginning of the year and really to April, were among the best performing and emerging markets, and really, extending to the rest of the world. One common yardstick that we use is how fast countries will get to their pre-pandemic level of output. Really until April, late May, we saw Southeast Asia in the lead. Come Delta, we've really revised our forecast, and instead of a V-shaped recovery, what we have is more of a W-shaped recovery in the region, with GDP contracting from the latest numbers in the second quarter in several countries, and just a very slow rebound in the rest of the region. That's what's really brought about this reordering of growth when we think about the different emerging regions and leaders and laggards through the end of this year. Delta really has been a game changer in that respect.
And with many countries in Southeast Asia still struggling to get access to vaccines, do you think at the current pace these measures and its effects could extend well into 2022? We're talking about the lockdowns, we're talking about the containment measures in these different countries in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I think they will be modified. Taking a page from Latin America, I think there are plans. I know the Philippines rolled back plans for a more flexible neighborhood or block level lockdown. But yeah, just given the current pace of vaccinations, Malaysia has really caught up and really ascended the curve in terms of total inoculations. But just given the pace of vaccinations now and our estimates of when we're going to get to some sort of immunity, or herd immunity, I should say, here, it's really going to be restrictions to handle a wave, with further waves, quite well possible, and extensions of these measures to handle them.
And the report says that helping Latin Americans cope with the crisis were a series of off-balance cash infusions that propped up incomes without adding to fiscal deficits, often in the form of pension drawdowns. In contrast, Southeast Asian authorities' firmer response to the new outbreaks caused retail spending to plummet in June and July, with declines of similar magnitude to those experienced during the first round of the lockdowns last year. And also thinner social safety nets and a younger banking system have prevented Southeast Asian governments from offering similar relief to consumers in the form of cash transfers and voluntary draws from pension funds. Do you think the governments in Southeast Asia are still a bit conservative when it comes to spending to stimulate the economy? Do we have smaller reserves versus the Latin American countries? What is happening in Southeast Asia in that sense?
Yeah, so again, really different responses by country. Singapore and Malaysia have rolled out massive stimulus programs, really with a focus on getting cash into consumers' pockets, while the response has been less robust, in Thailand and in the rest of the region. Southeast Asia has long been a model, really, for the rest of the emerging world in terms of fiscal prudence and, management of inflation and other macro variables. This has shifted in recent years, and higher debt and slower growth going into the pandemic, particularly in the Philippines, Indonesia, but also in Vietnam, has limited what governments perceive they can do. Just taking another branch from the Latin American experience, countries that do go big with stimulus have done better and have recovered better. And in that sense, there are countries, be it the Philippines or Vietnam, that could conceivably do more. The trick really will be to pivot and to begin consolidation on the other side of the pandemic, to maintain the trust of markets.
But tell us about the strengths of the Latin American and Southeast Asian economies right now. Do they go head to head in these areas, or can they support the gaps in the global supply chain?
It's a really good question. By and large, the two regions are competing in different arenas. Latin American economies are commodity producers, while Southeast Asia is more manufacturing oriented and integrated into global manufacturing supply chains. The exception is Mexico, which is a bit of competition there. Given its location to the U.S., given the development of the auto and electronics industries, And given tariffs, we've seen a lot of production or reshoring, or nearshoring, one might say, in Mexico, and that has given the region kind of a run for its money. But by and large, they're almost separate comparative advantages and separate stages of the production process globally.
Let's talk about the risks in Southeast Asia. Let's talk about political instability, political polarization, distrust in leaders. Could this also hamper the recovery process in countries in Southeast Asia?
Another really good question. The political waters are certainly choppy in Southeast Asia in a way that we really haven't seen in a long time. Whether it's the appointment of a new government in Malaysia or street protests in Thailand, sort of building up. That being said, our baseline is that these are sort of going to ride on top of the sea. They're not really going to really shift the outlook. Despite recent turmoil, Malaysia has been able to progress on a new stimulus package that is going to be a key factor in tiding the economy over. And I think it's just sort of a different ballgame in terms of the political process in Latin America and the issues around both elections and stability.
Latin American economies are geographically closer to North America and the US. Countries in Southeast Asia, on the other hand, are closer to China geographically. Can this perhaps push recovery to happen faster and stronger for countries in Southeast Asia?
I think in the medium term, as Southeast Asia sort of, rounds the bases and eventually brings the pandemic under control, and this won't happen for some time in our baseline outlook. We're looking sort of past the midpoint of next year. This integration with global supply chains is a plus. And for the region, I mean, the country that has, integrated most and sort of run, most competitive with China has been Vietnam, given the really large large wage differential. Average manufacturing wages in most of the rest of Southeast Asia are also now, very competitive with China. But to compete and really ascend the value chain more, will have to be done in terms of boosting productivity and skills acquisition, just given China's large scale and their dominance really of the higher ends of the value chain.